May I sit beside you?
There's plenty of other seats, so I don't see why you would need to do that.
May I sit beside you?
Are you deaf? Do I need to get the driver to throw you off?
You're going to die tonight.
Bloodwash is a first-person horror game that follows college student Sarah, who goes out to a laundromat late at night despite warnings of there being a killer on the loose. Atmosphere. At the start of the game, there's a ton of apprehension as you leave the house and enter the laundromat. Every decision feels like it might be your inevitable undoing, with all the warnings of the womb ripper on the loose and weird people telling you not to go to the laundromat. There's so many obvious foreboding and foreshadowing things that it felt like you were tempting fate just leaving the house. And knowing that Sarah is pregnant gives the experience the uncomfortable and vulnerable feeling that you're exactly what the killer is looking for. Bloodwash defaults to having a VHS and CRT filter over the game, which gives it a really grimy lo-fi look that enhances a lot of the game's environments to feel run down and dilapidated. The character models are all pretty blocky and unrealistic, which is true to the aesthetic but made it a little hard to feel sorry for them when they died. It does have a few tense moments when exploring the darkened office building or even just walking across the car park, which made me feel nervous. Sadly, the game has a few problems with pacing and leaves you with a substantial amount of downtime and lots of other activities to do, from browsing other stores that seem to have nothing to do with the story, to watching TV and reading comics whilst you wait for your laundry to be done. These were interesting, but sort of downplayed the threat of the womb ripper and drained all of the atmosphere as you took part in them. Another thing that put a real damper on the atmosphere was the feeling that Sarah can't die, with there being no save points, times where the killers just seem to not bother following Sarah into the next area, as well as the police officer section, where the killer stabs spikes into the vents the officer is hiding in, and all of the spikes coincidentally miss. All of these things led to the whole game feeling very tightly scripted and made it seem like it wasn't possible for Sarah to die until the game said so, removing a lot of the tension from the hour-long experience. Bloodwash does have a good atmosphere when it's trying to do something, but it often gives the player just too much downtime, or ends up feeling less threatening and more artificial. That's no Harry Masons.
Ha! Gotcha. So you're not stealing anything? My apologies.
Scares. The game's scares are mostly jump scares, and some of them are incredibly cheap ones, like Hobo Joe appearing in the basement just to scare the player, as well as the creepy guy doing it again on the bus, and Peepaw doing the same thing yet again in his shop. The same surprise appearance of the character is repeated a lot, and the events tend to lead nowhere. However, they're often effective either way. Some of the animations for the characters are rudimentary to say the least, and often came across as awkward rather than terrifying. Things fade to black a lot in tense moments, which took me out of the moment a lot and just again made the game feel very heavily scripted and more artificial. As the game progresses to the final stretch, you enter the Womb Ripper's lair, and so begins the final boss fight, which is a nerve-shattering experience as the Womb Ripper comes at you from the darkness and you try to defend yourself with a gun, if you picked it up. The ending is the best part of the game and really does an excellent job at pushing both tension and fear to a dizzying high. Bloodwash does have some scary moments. It can do fear well, but it just doesn't seem to be able to do it consistently for the hour-long duration of the game, and a lot of other problems with the game's atmosphere and sound design ruin these moments. That's still no Harry Masons. Sound design. The soundtrack is a small selection of 90s inspired synth pieces and some music stabs and incidental pieces that follow specific things. Though some seem to come out of nowhere, there's some really ominous bits near the start where it sounds like people breathing, which does a great job of putting you on edge, but other pieces are just odd, with the office exploration music sounding like someone fumbling around with a guitar. The sound effects are all over the place, with some being needlessly loud and awkward and feeling very artificial, and others being completely unremarkable. The voice acting ranges from character to character, with Stan near the start of the game sounding a little wooden but mostly fine, to the laundromat patron sounding almost silly.
I don't like to spread rumors, but
But what?
pretty mysterious. The way she died, I mean. It wasn't a fire that started quickly. She should have had plenty of time to get out.
The girl on the phone who tries to warn Sarah comes across as uninterested, and the cop you play as also lacks emotion. The voice acting is just what you'd expect from the kind of media Bloodwash is trying to emulate, and whilst it's not great, it does sort of feel intentional. Some of their voices, however, are almost distorted because they're just too loud, which just isn't good.
Hello? Is anyone there? This is the police. If anyone is there, then come out now. There's something wrong here.
There's some sound space issues with things that should be heard across the room fading into silence after you've walked a few feet away, but generally the directional audio is perfectly fine. There's a lot of problems with sound design that you could argue are a design choice, but some of them are just too grating to ignore. That's still no Harry Mason's. Gore. Thanks to the graphics, some of the gore can be pretty nasty, especially some of the bodies you discover in the Womb Ripper's lair. The death animations, as mentioned earlier, are a bit basic, but thanks to the VHS and CRT filter, they look gnarly regardless. Sometimes bodies look a bit shapeless and a lot of the detail is lost with the same filters, but it's generally quite nasty and gets the point across. That's one Harry Mason. Story. The story is like a lot of cheesy 80s and 90s slasher films where there's some kind of killer on the loose, but the protagonist just has to do the laundry and doesn't believe in any of the rumours and dismisses them, and this is no different. However, Bloodwash builds up intrigue with the story of a woman who was badly burned in the previous laundromat that is boarded up next door, and even manages to have a plot twist near the end that was actually quite nice. Being an hour-long game, the story is quite limited, but it is still decent enough for the amount of time you spend playing the game, making the final score 2 out of 5 Harry Masons. Bloodwash is clearly a passion project with so many nods to other horror mediums and games that you find exploring its world, but its execution really lets down what could have been a unique experience. Again, I'd like to remind you the whole thing is down to my opinion in horror games, and if you don't share this opinion, then that's cool, I get it. I'd like to point out that whilst I failed to do my laundry, I did not scream like a banshee or run off the computer, and I advise you don't either. There'll be more horror reviews in the pipeline, and thanks for watching. Always go check out Bumps in the middle of the night. Peace.